It's the Let's Go Eat and Drink Show with hosts Jimmy Santangelo and Bill Allred. I'm your announcer, Zach Caton, and we're coming to you live on tape from Visit Salt Lake. Our guest today is Salt Lake County District Attorney Sim Gill. We cover a wide range of topics with Mr. Gill, everything from the rule of law, police shootings, great Indian food, and his drink of choice. Here's a hint, it's scotch. And now, here are your hosts, Jimmy and Bill.
Sim Gill, District Attorney, Salt Lake County District Attorney, do you consider yourself sort of a gourmet?
To the extent that when I was a young boy, my mother and my aunt said, we know you like to eat, and if you want to continue in that endeavor, you better learn how to cook and enjoy that food because nobody's going to feed it to you.
I was going to ask you, because I know you grew up in India, came to the United States when you were pretty young.
Yeah, I was about 10, 11 years of age.
But you grew up in India. Do you still favor Indian food, and do you cook Indian food?
I do. I like Indian food because I think what's fantastic about Indian cuisine and cuisine from that part of the world is, remember, protein is something that was not a luxury, and so they created incredible flavor profiles and really beautiful tasting food, and the complexity of it. So the subtlety of the mosaic of different spices is really a wonderful, wonderful construction that's there. And I learned how to cook from the women in our family, and there's no recipe. It really is a series of spices that are brought in. You look at visually by the color of the food as you're sauteing it, to the smell of the food as you're cooking it, and those things are just kind of this very visual, sensual kind of an experience, and the food sort of is constructed out of that in its best moment.
So when you cook some of your signature dishes, whatever they may be, are they always? They must be always slightly different.
They are.
Yeah.
They are. Just like the human experience, every time you eat something or drink something, you're at a different place and you're bringing a different sensibility. So you have enough of a similarity, but the uniqueness of lived agency is exactly that experience. And I think that's the way we should think about it. Because, we say, well, here's this food, it's exactly the same. Well, it's not really exactly the same. Although that food might be exactly the same, you're not exactly the same. And so it's the interactive process. So the art of appreciation eating is an interactive process. We're not in a calcified, static existence.
Was it hard for you when you came to America with your family? As I recall, your father was in government service here, like in the Forest Service,
he was
county agent, or
with the assessor's office, and then ultimately retired with the tax commission. But my childhood memories are in those days. The state of Utah, as a political entity, used to spend 5 years assessing the value of the entire state of Utah to sort of create the tax structure. So they used to have to physically send out teams that would go out there, and you had to go and appraise and evaluate that. Now, for me as a kid, that was fantastic because in the summertime, growing up, my summers were spent in places like Kanab and Loa and Delta and in Vernal and in Price, and so my childhood was sort of
idyllic.
Yeah.
What I was going to ask you about all of that is, did you have any hard time? As you said, you like to eat, but did you have a hard time adjusting to cuisine here?
Oh, my favorite story is we were on the plane. My father had emigrated. My mom and my brother were on the plane. We flew on Lufthansa Airlines, which is a German airline. And
they're great.
They're
great airlines.
Good airlines, right? And the first Western food I tasted was boiled carrots on an airplane.
And
that was at a time when they actually used to give you real food, not prepackaged food, right? And I remember the dread that went through me, and I said, "Oh my God, where are we going? They have no flavor in their food whatsoever."
This is an example of it.
But I assume you adapted.
So when we came here, the closest food was Mexican food, which had that cumin in it, that little bit of spice in it, and that was sort of the closest proximity. And then, of course, growing up, we used to do annual treks to California because you couldn't buy spices here. So mom and dad would load the entire car, weigh it down with Indian spices, and we'd come into the heartland with Indian spices. So we would have our, foodstuffs for the year. And then we had graduate students who went to the University of Utah. We didn't have Indian restaurants. This is the early 70s.
Yeah.
This is 1971. And so our home became this place where Indian food would be cooked, and all these graduate students would come down there because that was the only place where they could get a home-cooked meal with that flavor profile, and so it was really nice.
I remember stopping in St. George one time for the night. I needed to sleep, and I went to a motel on Main Street, and I walked into this motel and I went, Indian people run this place. Man, you could just smell all the spices and stuff.
It is there.
Yeah.
Traveling in from California, anything to declare? Just flavor and culture.
That's right. We're importing it in here to the heartland here.
Well, let's talk about some serious. Well, this is all serious, but let's talk about being a DA.
Yeah.
What does a Salt Lake County District Attorney do?
I think people have a sense, but I don't know if they really do. So the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office is the largest district attorney's prosecution office in the largest county. So we prosecute all serious crime, which is Class A misdemeanor to capital homicide cases within the geographic jurisdictions of Salt Lake County, right? And so we do criminal prosecution. That's one part of it. The other part that most people don't fully realize is that the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office is also the civil legal counsel to a $1.8 billion corporation called Salt Lake County Government. And so my client is the mayor, my client is the council, my client is the sheriff, my client is the independent elected. My client as Salt Lake County government with every contracts, with every civil litigation, all of that is part of my portfolio as well. I have almost 28 civil attorneys, and we are the in-house civil legal counsel for the largest county government in the state.
Is it in any way analogous to the Attorney General's office? Are you the chief law enforcement officer of the county?
I hear that title being sort of thrown about.
Chief law enforcement officer.
Chief law enforcement officer, and I was a little cringe with that moment because. It's like somebody, there's a new sheriff in town kind of a mindset and put the badge on, and I know my AG kind of does it all the time. Look, what we are public servants serving a public institution. That institution is not my institution. That actually belongs to you. I'm a temporary caretaker, and one of my responsibilities is criminal prosecution of crime that happens here. So in that sense, I'm a prosecuting entity, an institution. I don't know if I'm the chief law enforcement officer. I'm just a public servant.
You mentioned the word sheriff, and I've just clicked something in my mind. I've been thinking about sheriffs lately because I've been watching this edition of Fargo with John Hamm playing a sheriff. He's a sheriff. And he said at one point the FBI agents come to him, and he's sitting in a hot tub, smoking a cigar, got a big hat on, got nipple rings. And the FBI agent said, "You've been violating federal laws." I said, "I'm not violating any laws. I'm the law of the land. I am. Sheriffs are the law of the land. You hold no jurisdiction over me." And there is a strain of that running among sheriffs. It's the posse comitas.
That's right. Like somehow that they are outside of any structure. And that somehow they have this sovereign independence as a part of that.
Is there anything to that?
Other than incredible imagination, there really isn't much to it.
He said, the people elected me to do, and I do the people's work.
Yeah, and the people, and when you were elected, you walked up and you swore an oath to the Constitution of the state of Utah and the whatever state you're in, North Dakota, wherever, and the Constitution of the United States of America. It's fascinating for me because the political process that you engage in, which already has preordained rules within the infrastructure, the political infrastructure, is what is giving you the power. Then, as you get that power, you want to say, because you gave me that power, I get to step outside of that. It's a closed universe. So if you get any power and legitimacy, it is within the four corners of that framework. You don't get to step outside of time and history and space, although that is, like I said, science fiction, and I guess you could do that, and there are some people who are attempting to do that.
Yeah.
And I find that to be the most perverse notion of our constitutional principles.
Well, how is it that why does it occur that one district attorney, and I'm thinking specifically of the Davis County attorney, Troy Rawlings, get involved in investigations in other counties, in other jurisdictions? It does happen. David Levitt had some stuff investigated.
Yes and no. I mean, sometimes we conflict stuff out. So sometimes if I have a conflict with my office, I will send it over to a sister jurisdiction because I still need somebody to do the analysis, and that underlying conflict that might be there should not be used because I may create a bias outcome. So we do it out of that sense. The other times that it happens is that if a crime may start in Davis County, but it ends in Salt Lake County, then I have jurisdiction over it.
If it starts there but ends here.
Right? Okay. Or I can have something that starts here and ends over there. So there's two ways. The jurisdiction is established by where the crime happens or where the crime may start. If you'll remember, about 8 or 10 years ago, my office prosecuted this serial rapist who had different women. He had gone on this LDS dating app, and there were about 8 or 9 different women who were the victims of it. And they would come from out of different counties, but they met up with him here, and then he transported them to yet another county where he sexually assaulted them. And because that nexus was here, that's how I established jurisdiction. So sometimes those kind of things can come into play. So
can you give me an example of? You said if you determine that there's a bias in your office, you might turn it over to somebody else. What does that mean specifically?
So the thing is, look, we're public servants, and the legitimacy of what we do is tied to the integrity with which we do it, and in the service of our community, right? And so if I have a personal conflict. You're my best friend, or I have a business relationship, and now you may have a matter before this office where we're going to do something. Then that may create a conflict. Now, sometimes I can wall off that conflict. I can, so for example, a mechanism that's available in my office is I'll turn to my senior staff and say, I have a conflict, so please build a wall around me. When you receive this information, I should not be able to have access to it. And as you deliberate to make the decisions on it, that should not be consulted with me, right? So I can create that distance sometimes. That's one way to do it, right? The other time to do it is that you say that I'm just going to have to kick it out. So, for example, our illustrious Attorney General right now is sort of saying that he is going to investigate a bunch of parties, and because he has a conflict, right? But so he is talking about his personal conflict that he has. Now he's implying that his agency doesn't have any conflict. Now your agency may have some conflict as well. So you have to go through those two analysis. And there's a difference between the perception of conflict and actual conflict. And so what I mean by that is clearly everybody understands actual conflict, but sometimes the integrity of the institution is tarnished by the perception of it. And so out of abundance of caution, sometimes you want to conflict something out even though there may be a perception of it.
Yeah, got it. Well, let's talk just a little bit. I don't want to go into the whole bunch of Sean Reyes stuff, but this has brought up the issue of whether we should be electing the Attorney General, whether the voter should elect the Attorney General. You're an elected official, so it's a similar situation. should the Attorney General be appointed by the governor, like the President appoints the Attorney General of the United States? But I don't know who the hell would appoint the district attorney of a county. I guess the mayor.
So when all the scandal and fiasco was happening with Shurtleff and Swallow, I had a couple of legislators reach out, and this conversation was occurring. And I gave them actually a very different answer, because right now it's being presented as a binary choice: election and or appointment. I am not a fan of appointments because the argument is that you're trying to appoint to get away from control, but by the nature of appointment itself, you're creating a different kind of control, and there's not that accountability. So it becomes politicized through the appointment process and the entity that's exercising that power, right? So I really do believe in empowering our communities in engaging in the election process. Now, my proposal at that time, in fact, it was with Senator Weiler, I believe, that I was talking. He goes, should we do appointment or whatever? I go, here's my proposal. I think the Attorney General's position, the District Attorney's position, and the Sheriff position should be all elected, but they should be all nonpartisan. So there's not a Republican or a Democrat, but it is truly an independent office without any partisan affiliation.
But except even when that happens, you know who they are.
True, because our environment is political, and there is that affiliation. But I think but we're doing symbolically and also creating a space for independence there. As when called upon to do so, we really want to say that our core value is of independence, right? So sometimes I explain that when I'm running for office or whatever, I go, I do not meet victims or survivors as Democrats or Republican victims. They're just victims in our community, and I don't know what a Republican or a Democratic interpretation of a particular statute is going to look like. And the analogy that I use is like, I go, when you start to create those binary realities, it's sort of like when your house is on fire. You run out in your pajamas in the middle of the night, the firefighters are showing up to put out the fire, and they're lining up and pulling out the hose, and you're in there and you go, I know my house is burning, but could the Democratic firefighters line up over here and the Republicans over here, because I'm going to let only half of you put out the fire.
Democrats to put that fire
right?
on. Yeah.
And so my point is that the nature of certain public institutions are really truly in the service of our community, and to the extent that we can decouple them as an aspirational value that there should be independent, we should lean into that. But that responsibility, that ownership, that power should be in the hands of the electorate. I'm a very simple person. I say, let us granularly give that to every citizen that we can.
How many times have you won election as district attorney?
I just won my 4th one last year.
And it's a 4-year term?
A 4-year term.
4-year term.
I've been a public prosecutor for now almost 29 years, and I'm the first minority district attorney elected in the history of Salt Lake County. I'm the first Indian-born district attorney elected in the history of this country, and I'm the first
in the history of the country.
In the history of this country. Nice. It happened in Utah. And I am the first district attorney who has won 4 consecutive terms in the history of this office.
That's great.
It's pretty impressive. Let's raise this weak-watered, non-alcoholic
Non-alcoholic. It's, if you want to try it, it's, what is it called?
Kentucky 74. It's
no
a
alcohol in it.
Yeah.
You can get this at some local retail shops.
Now, I want to talk about one thing that you've been criticized for, and I think I told you about this earlier. You're in charge. You have to investigate cop shootings. Whenever there's a cop-involved shooting in Salt Lake City, it's your office that has to investigate it to find out whether the shooting was justified or not. And does it have to be a fatal shooting, or it's even just
any use of lethal
shooting.
Force?
You have been criticized for exonerating cops too often. You know that.
Of course.
So talk about that.
Absolutely. So let's put it in its proper context. What we are doing and how we're doing it and why it should be a concern, right? So first of all, my predecessors never used to go through an analysis. The history of our office and many offices was just when this happened, there was one sentence of there's no crime, no nothing. So we made a very conscious decision. In fact, we were one of the few offices nationally that actually took this death of a human being in our community serious enough to say that we're going to actually investigate these things. And we're not only going to investigate these things, but we're going to explain to our community what happened and how it happened. And we're going to do it in a uniform way to educate and inform our community. Here's a fascinating thing. So in the United States of America, there's 3 ways the state action kills somebody. One is by declaration of war by Congress. They have to come together and declare that we're going to engage in war and we kill people under state sanction. Second is after 30 years of appeals or more on a death penalty case. That's state-sanctioned killing. The third way is every time a police officer pulls out a gun and shoots a citizen or a member of our community. Now think about the process involved in the first 2 and think about the process that did not exist in the third one. So we take that serious. So anytime there's a loss of life, no matter why it happens, I think we should spend time doing that. So we became the first office to publicly start to explain that. And if you look at my findings, I publish all my findings.
I watched you do one of these online or something, and it was quite involved. I mean, you're not screwing around there.
No, because I think our citizens should know. And now, as we go through that, we knew, so we wanted to be transparent. We also knew that as we started to become transparent and inform our community, and they start to get educated, they would then know what is making them angry and why. And that's why I've said that the next step is, and I explained to them, this is what the law is, this is what the law allows me to do, these are my limitations, and I have to reach this conclusion within the exercise of that law. And then I've said that if we want different outcomes, then we need to change the law. That means we, our community of citizens, have to get involved in the political process to effectuate, to give the remedy through the participatory democracy to give us the law. So that's the reason we're doing that. And we do it because I have found about 8 or 9 to be unjustified. We've tried to prosecute a couple of them, and you
found 8 or 9 cop shootings to be unjustified by the cop.
Yeah. And I take grief for that. Just again, I'm trying to be very objective to just lay it out for our community. And then we've tried to prosecute a couple, but that also shows the systemic impediments that are there. And by laying it out in a transparent way, then we can honestly say, does the byproduct of this reflect and coincide with the values that we hold of our public institutions? So if you remember when we had all the protests and everything, my office was the only office that sent out an open letter to the governor and every elected, and we gave them 22 very distinct different kinds of proposals of how they can improve this, because we wanted to give them a blueprint so they didn't know not how to do it. We could have given 100, but it's been part of having this dialogue in a transparent way.
I assume on some of them, these investigations that you do, you get to a point where you say, I really can't tell one way or another.
Yeah.
Does that happen?
But remember, because our law enforcement get to exercise their constitutional rights, and that means that they don't have to share information with me. And what I have told my team is, whether somebody gives us that information or doesn't give us that information, we have a responsibility to still try to reconstruct in the most logical, rational way what happened when a person dies in our community. Right? Because I want to be able for you to ask pointed questions, serious questions, and you don't have to agree with me. But I think we have an ethical and moral responsibility, an institutional responsibility to share anytime somebody dies in our community.
Did you ever feel that you got it wrong?
That's a great question. I have certainly been through analysis where I have struggled with my team about the outcome. But
that's a tough thing to do.
Yeah, I've sat with parents, and I've said, I wish I could give you a different outcome than the one that I have to give to you. I'm sorry you lost a loved one. Ask me any question, be angry at me, but here's what I found, and here's the rationale behind it, and this is why I'm doing it, and here are my limitations on it. Because I think their grief, their loss, they get to be pointed with me, and I have a responsibility to the very best that I can, that you don't have to agree, but I have an obligation to struggle to give you the very best answer that I can. And sometimes that answer isn't like the one that I want, but that I am obligated to give that under the parameters of the constraints that are put by the law. So I have absolutely struggled.
Yeah.
And in a very deeply emotional way, my team has struggled. Because I'm sorry, I don't care what the person's history is or what the context might be. It is still a loss of a human being, and that is somebody's son, that's somebody's spouse, that's somebody's a loved one.
Whether it's a bad guy or a good guy, it's still the loss of
and it speaks to a value that we want to have as a society, that if somebody dies, we want to know the truth of what happened.
Yeah, yeah. We'll get off the serious stuff here in just a second.
Just one more.
We'll talk about food and drink for a second more, but
it's your show, and you are God at this universe. So I am trying to do answer your question.
Well, you're answering directly. There was a thing in your bio that said when you were a little kid in India, in a small village in India, you saw some guy in the town get beaten and then wrongfully arrested for a crime he did not commit.
Yeah.
And that's what you think led you to pursue this career.
I think all of our lives are a series of experiences, and those experiences continue to populate and color the narrative that we all have in our head, both in the way that we look at the world and how we experience the world. And one of the seminal experiences that I had, my father had come here, emigrated in 1969, we came here in 71. There was a window that I was living in with my uncle. And there was and this kindly old man who used to come and help my aunt clean her house, and then he'd go help clean the neighbor's house and so forth, and that's how he made his money. One day there was this ruckus outside in the street, and everybody sort of gathered there. And I went out there with my uncle, and there was this kindly old man who was very kind to me, always curled up in a ball, and there were about 4 police officers with these long bamboo sticks just wailing on him and wailing on him. And he was just curled up, and he was begging them to stop. And I remember this kind of exchange, this horror that was hurting. I go, make them stop. I go, what's going on? And my uncle said, a crime's been committed. And I go, well, what are they doing? They're trying to get evidence. They're trying to solve a crime so somebody can be held accountable. And I remember this kind of an exchange, and I was probably about 9 or 10 years of age at that time. And so he's curled up. And I don't know if anybody's ever seen somebody get physically beat. That is not.
I have.
It is a brutal experience. Yep. It's not one that you can forget, and especially when he's crying. And so he's professing his innocence, and then of course the tenor changes. He's like saying whatever they want them to say, and confessing and saying he did it. Fast forward about 3 months, and they of course find out that he hadn't stolen anything. It was somebody else. No. And that left a huge impression on me. And the impression that it left on me is that when you have power, you also have incredible responsibility. And when you have power that can impact people's lives and their liberty interest and the trajectory of their emotions and mental health and well-being, you have a responsibility. And so it's something that's never left me. Look, my goal is not to go out and win favor from anyone or to do something because somebody wants me to do it. I really do very seriously take the privilege of this elected office and the privilege that I have. And I want to be as responsible and thoughtful as I can. And sometimes when I give political speeches, I sometimes say it this way. I go, the best political education that I ever had was that I was born in a third world country, because I know what poverty feels like, and I know what corruption does to the soul and the destruction of the fabric of a community. And I think we sometimes forget what a privilege it is, and that ultimately people who get elected are actually there to work for us, that we are all their bosses. They're not our bosses. And we sometimes forget that. And that experience has always left that well in.
You know, so I have an attorney friend who's a defense attorney, and he defends a lot of lowlife a lot of times. And he says, the people I defend are, you know, I've seen them do horrible things. And I said, why do you do it? And he said, because your office has all the power.
Yeah.
I mean, really, the state has the power.
Yeah.
And he said, so this guy who has no power deserves somebody to speak for him.
So we both live and interact in a space where we talk about due process. And due process are the fundamental rules of engagement that recognize the integrity of the person in front of you to conclude that fairness, because our legitimacy comes from that fairness, right? Any authoritarian regime can beat the hell out of you and get a confession, but we would say it's illegitimate, right? So how do we import legitimacy in a participatory democracy? So the due process becomes critical, and I tell this to my younger attorneys as well. I go, do not be chagrined because somebody wants to go take this matter to their trial, because that is their right and our obligation. And that means that do not be chagrined that it's a difficult prosecution, because we are being tested to put our evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the social contract that we've engaged in.
Yeah, although, you know, I was involved in something, won't go into all the details, but I'm there with the defense attorney sitting in a room, and in comes the prosecutor, who was a very nice guy, and the defense attorney and the prosecutor, and they're talking and talking, and we're just getting ready to go in and see the judge, and they talk back and forth, and they ask me a couple of questions, and they say, so what do you think, Bill? Would you go along with that? And I went, well, okay. And they said, okay, well, I'll just go tell the judge. We don't have to, you know, it was a plea. They just worked out a deal with the defendant in the case, who was in another room, and me. It was all just done behind the scenes. And I said, you know, people complain about that sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
I kind of liked it. I thought, it's expediting the matter. We're all coming to an agreement here.
Mediation.
Mediation.
Well, you know, look, a crime which is promulgated by the product of participatory democracy, we say we are creating sort of an artificial reality in one sense, right? Because we create a law, and we say if you engage in this conduct, it imports this violation. And that harm has occurred. And so we are ultimately trying to repair that harm. And if there is consensus between you and the state and the person, then we can at least look at some return back to balance. You know, look, I'm a huge fan of restorative justice principles. And my definition of restorative justice is this. When crime happens, it causes injuries to victims, offenders, and the communities in which crime occurs. Justice is the repairing of all three injuries, not one for the other, but trying to find that balance between all three injuries. That's what we are really trying to do if we are effective.
Restorative justice.
Restorative justice.
All right, let's get off that. Just quickly, we're going to wind this up, but I want you to tell me your favorite Indian dish, and I want you to tell me about roti.
Oh, roti.
Because I don't really. Whenever we have Indian food, we have naan.
Yeah.
And then I just saw this article about roti, and I went, well, that sounds delightful.
It is.
Tell me about roti and your favorite Indian dish.
Well, so my favorite Indian dish is the classic, which is chicken curry. And curry is an amalgamation of spices that each family really kind of has their own secret formula.
Do you make your own?
I try to make my own, and it is often a mixture between cumin and coriander, dried coriander. You pulverize it, and you want to pulverize it, but then you can add all sorts of different things to it. As you put fresh garlic, fresh ginger, fresh green peppers, the sautéing of onions. You can throw in cinnamon in there, sticks in there. You can put in cloves, and so you create this thing that is very fragrant and wonderfully delicious to complement the cooking of the meat, and you can create as many variations on that recipe that you want to. So it's a symphony that you play with different notes all the time. Roti, which is taking whole wheat flour, a little bit of salt, wet it down, make a dough out of it, roll it out, and you take a cast iron griddle and heat it up, and it is our tortilla. is the version of our tortilla.
It's thin then.
It is very thin. You roll it out, very thin, and when you put it, it cooks that flour very quickly. You flip it around a couple of times, and it becomes that staple of that bread. And it's the most easy, accessible bread that you can create. Simple.
And fast, I think.
Fast.
So I was reading about it, and I said, so you just do it in a pan, but I was almost bought one, a roti press.
You can do the roti press,
I almost bought one.
And
they got you.
And we have different levels of experience that come to confront this opportunity, and we have different levels of competencies that engage with that, all the way from the purist and everything else to the person who picks up the phone and calls it in at a restaurant. So that's the full range of it.
That's how you get roti.
That's how you
just go to the restaurant. All right, Sim Gill, thanks a lot. We're going to do a little. You want to do a little news here?
Yeah, I have something. I understand you're a Scotch guy.
Yes.
You're a Scotch whiskey guy. I've got some news. We like to do a feature we call Splashing News.
Okay.
So here's something. American single malt whiskey, a freewheeling cousin of Scotch, comes to age. I don't know if you know this, but according to the New York Times, and we've covered this before, the federal government is about to recognize and define a fast-growing whiskey style called American single malt.
Yes.
Now, American single malt might sound like a contradiction in terms, but the style has been booming over the last decade, and in the coming months, the TTB, Tax and Trade Bureau, will release an official definition of the American single malt category.
Yes.
It's always been, this category was defined by a ladies and gentlemen handshake agreement on how to produce it, but now it's going to be defined. The proposed American definition, admittedly looser than Scotland's famous rigid rules. Like Scotch, American single malt will have to be made at one distillery, hence the single part, using 100% malted barley, distilled entirely at one distillery, mashed and distilled and matured in the United States, and other aging requirements that parallel the Scots. There are a number of American single malt producers around the country, and right here in Utah. So the two that always gain recognized awards, Sugar House Distillery, their American single malt, as well as High West, their High Country single malt. So Utah's making the news as well. Yeah, it'll be pretty cool. And that's your splash of news. That's your splash.
And that whole market is also going into Japanese single malt as well. And,
right.
and you know, but they don't get to call the term Scotch is tied to geographically, just like the term champagne is tied to the French continent. So although that's historically the lineage of it, but it is about the idea of a single malt whiskey.
They just have to call it whiskey.
The whiskey. And American distillers are actually starting to produce some really fantastic stuff, just like Japanese are as well. Now, just a word of caution that when you go out and buy your Japanese single malt there, they actually will not distill it on site, and they will bring it and then rebottle it because the price point is so high now that they're profiteering off it. So the consumer beware of that.
Do you have a favorite Scotch?
Oh, I've got a lot of favorite Scotch. Dollar for the complexity of the unique flavor profile. Lagavulin, 16-year-old, about $98 a bottle in Utah. Really peaty, iodine-y kind of stuff that comes through it. Fantastic. Some of the Oban and Taliskers for a little bit pepperiness. That's there. That's wonderful with that. And I've been also sort of evolving into American spirits. Our bourbon scene is incredible in this country.
I'm a bourbon man.
And a small batch bourbon. E.H. Taylor, you know, just incredible stuff. Calumet, fantastic, right? So I think it's about appreciating the spirit-making craft. And when somebody does it well, it kind of stands on its own. And American bourbons and the complexity of small batch can hold toe-to-toe with any single malt that's out there. And American single malts are rising to the scene, and Japanese single malt and Japanese whiskey, some of them.
Suntories.
They're fantastic. So the world is open in terms of people who want to explore.
What Indian drinks? I mean, all I know is the beer, Kingfisher, but what spirits do?
Well, Indians were influenced by the British Raj and so forth. So I mean, look, I grew up in a household where scotch was everything.
Your dad was a scotch.
Absolutely. Majority of them will drink scotch, and they try to emulate that. But also growing up in India, right, the local moonshine that was created in regional villages was also exceptional. Wonderful craftsmanship, by the way, that's out there. But Indians are fundamentally scotch drinkers because of that historical influence. And then a great series of beers, like, we could do another episode on just beers alone. But
I think all I know is Kingfisher and Taj Mahal. I think there's a Taj Mahal.
And Taj Mahal and Golden Eagle is the one. I remember that from my childhood because my uncle and my uncles used to like to drink Golden Eagle, and they would have these big buckets with long liter bottles in there.
This is a side of Sim Gill that you just don't get to see very often.
This is the part that we want to make sure we explore because all of us have that hidden side that needs to be brought out.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. It's when we talk to you on the radio occasionally, there's just not enough time. Not enough time to get into it. And you are a very detailed person. You speak in very good, distinct detail, and we just don't usually have time to do it. So it's great to have a long conversation.
Well, thank you so much for the privilege.
My pleasure. Always nice to see you.
Cheers to everybody.
All right, cheers.
To everyone.
Jimmy Santangelo, way to go. Thank you, all of our production people, Dawson, and they help here at Visit Salt Lake. We're doing our first recordings here at the Visit Salt Lake studios. And for more information on that, you can go to visitsaltlake.com. And sayonara.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Let's Go Eat and Drink Show with Jimmy Santangelo. You can contact Jimmy at www.thewineacademyofutah.com. As for Bill Allred, it might be best to just leave him alone. Comments, questions, or angry complaints to the management should be directed to the Let's Go Eat Show at gmail.com. The Let's Go Eat and Drink Show is produced by Dawson Dow. Our theme music was composed and recorded by Doug Wild. Recording facilities as needed are by the Visit Salt Lake Media Center at www.visitsaltlake.com. The show is a Double Plus production. I'm Zach Caton. Thanks for visiting. Please exit through the gift shop.